Hello class, today I'm going to be doing a informative speech on deforestation and how it relates to the epidemic of Ebola that happened in Liberia from 2014 to 2016. Here's my audience.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
In the background you can probably hear my niece and my nephew. My apologies. So to start off with this informative speech, in the aftermath of the Ebola epidemic of 2014 to 2016 in Liberia, it's important for us to know how deforestation was one of the major causes that contributed to the disease. The specific purpose is to inform my audience about the concerns of deforestation and its effect on the environment and how it can impact people. Deforestation, one thing that we need to realize is that it can happen anywhere. It doesn't just happen in the rainforest. It's important for everybody to know this. That way, in the future, mistakes are not made. It's very important that the generations of tomorrow have concern for the environment. We only have one, and if we destroy it, then it's on us. Here's the introduction. I'll restate it. So with the recent Ebola epidemic, it's been a world concern that deforestation of Liberia has gotten to a point of being out of control. No longer can nations turn their heads because Ebola and its causes are at our front doors. Next slide. The topics to discuss: history and causes and effects of deforestation in Liberia, programs and policies implemented to combat deforestation in Liberia. Next slide. So here's the history of deforestation in Liberia. About half of the population lives in or near forested areas. Estimates suggest that Liberia's 3.4 million acres of relatively intact forest and about 2.2 million of poor forest coverage. So basically, about half of their forest was being cut down, and it was cut down for various reasons. One of the main reasons was because of war. War increased the dependence of traditional fuels and charcoal. Next slide. Here's a history of deforestation in Liberia continued. During the Civil War, over 500,000 people were displaced. All right, that put such a great strain on the forest to where they had to do things to survive. One of them is they used the wood as a fuel source. All right, the war put a great strain on one of the weakest nations. All right, next slide. Recent effects of deforestation in Liberia. One of the most recent effects was the Ebola epidemic. The commonality between numerous outbreaks of Ebola, scientists say, is growing human activity and deforestation in previously untouched forests. So what they're saying is that normally in an area that humans would not have contact with certain diseases that are out there, now because the forest is being cut down, humans have more interaction with strands of diseases that they may not otherwise be used to. So we're coming into contact with things that are new to us. Next slide. Here's the recent effects of deforestation in Liberia continued. All right, in an article written by Terence McCory states, the increase in Ebola outbreaks since 1994 is frequently associated with the drastic changes in forest ecosystem in tropical Africa. So with deforestation, we're changing our ecosystem. So when we cut down trees, we're letting off toxins into the air, and it affects the entire ecosystem. Next slide. All right, here's recent effects continued. It is important to understand that in West Africa, has not had an outbreak of Ebola like this before, so it is normal and logical to look at how deforestation played such a role. It is said that logging companies have bought off more than half the forest in Liberia to make way for palm oil. So this is one of the things that logging companies are doing, and they're doing it illegally. They're not doing it with the permission of the people, and basically they're making a quick buck. Here's a picture of one of the areas of forest to where they just went and cut down. Next slide. As a result of this, as of September 25th, 2014, Liberia announced it would accept $150 million in development aid from Norway. In doing so, Liberia would be the first country in Africa to completely stop cutting down its trees in return for development aid. So with this is the nations of the world have seen it as such an issue to where they're actually paying Liberia not to cut down the trees, which is a good thing. Next slide. Now we're going to go into some of the laws in which came into place. The National Forestry Reform Law. Liberia was in need of reform so it could save its future forests. So it went through the process between 2003 and 2006, and they created this this way to help save the forest. Okay, and in 2006, this law was actually reformed. Next slide. According to Dr. Sherman, throughout the process, the National Forestry Reform has been assisted by partners in Liberia Forest Initiative, known as the LFI. The LFI is a partnership of governors, NGOs, and donor agencies collaboratively support the rehabilitation and reform of Liberia's forestry sector. So basically you have all these agencies that are coming into play to help protect the forest. Next slide. Here's some of the partners that support the reform. The World Bank, the Conservation International, FANUA, and Flora International. These are their symbols. Next slide. Okay, in 2006, sanctions were lifted in Liberia from the United Nations Security Council on its exportation of lumber after its civil war, in which the timber was used to fund much of the war. The NFR reform plays a vital role in getting Liberia back on track. Next slide. So this is where the Environmental Protection Agency Act comes in play. The EPA was established in 2003, but fully became functional in 2006. The purpose of this act was to develop and establish a monitoring, coordinating, supervising authority for the sustainable management of the environment. So the EPA was like the checks and balances. They said, hey, we need to make sure that these other groups are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and that's where they came into play. Next slide. Conclusion. As deforestation continues to pose a serious threat, it is essential that agencies like the NFR and the EPA in Liberia remain effective in fighting against deforestation. They are still young agencies that have been around for less than a decade and have much to deal with, especially in the aftermath of a 14-year civil war. That's one of the biggest things to remember is Liberia was in a 14-year civil war. So 14 years of war, look at all the fuel that was being used. Look at all the force that they were selling to help fund these wars. So that's one of the biggest things to think about. And as long as the NFR and EPA continue to conduct workshops, they educate its workers as well as the people of Liberia and its policies are enforced, they will be successful. So it's important for us to realize and to understand that agencies like this, they are in place to help conserve the rainforest. They are in place to make sure that something like this does not happen again. And currently, as of June 9th of 2016, Liberia is supposedly Ebola free. Okay. Penny, any questions? That concludes my informative speech. Thank you.